What's up, my fellow fiends? It's Nim here, back again with more RPG horror stories. Today, we're in for a special treat. This story comes to us from one of y'all. That's right, it's our first subscriber story. I'd like to give a big thank you to artmanxp for this one, so sit back, relax, and let's get into that post. This was one of the few times in my younger years that I wish I wasn't so naive. It started with me getting laid off from my school job for the third time due to dumb paperwork reasons, and I needed a new one for the time being. So I thought I was in luck when one of the local D&D Facebook groups had someone offering to pay anyone to run a game for him, his girls, and their friends. He was going to pay me about 20 USD an hour for 1 or 2 sessions a week. The sessions were about 6 to 8 hours a game. The edition was going to be Pathfinder 1st Edition, starting with the basic handbook and adding books from there depending on the players. Players which we had a very high turnover of. The one player who was consistent enough was the host, who I'll just call Mr. Rogue. He lived on the edge of a very well-off neighborhood leading into the poorer half of the city I lived in. The shared living room of the house was full of different anime, video games, comics, adult toys, and drug paraphernalia, put away neatly on shelves. At first I thought this was strange, but I reminded myself that I'm in California, and everyone at the house was college age. I figured this was probably normal-ish. Mr. Rogue was a thin man in his late 20s who dressed and sounded like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. By the way, y'all, I'm not going to be doing a Shaggy impression. No one wants to hear that. He was the owner of the house-turned-boarding room, which also happened to include a massage parlor / traditional medicine shop. Or at least that's how he explained how he knew the drug habits of everyone in the local area. He was studying at the local community college to improve his current property management skills and hopefully entice some investors to help him open up a hotel in the middle of the drug and gang-filled area of the city. That, coupled with his addiction to WoW, World of Warcraft, left him without any time to run games for his girls or their friends. He had me run a test game with some of his top girls. At the time, they seemed either not that interested or had other things on their mind. Also, I was a little rusty, and I had hoped I wouldn't have to be the living rulebook for them. The 3 college-age girls seemed to wear very revealing clothing for their work, which was described as very progressive about dress code, and also they wore heavy amounts of makeup. I found it odd that they were dressed for work, since as far as I could tell, they were on their day off. I felt like this was kind of strange, but reminded myself for the second time that I live in California and nothing is normal here. So I ran one of the free modules off the Pathfinder website. Me and Mr. Rogue helped the other 3 players make characters. They were a barbarian, a fighter, and to the begrudging agreement of his top assistant girl, a bard. The adventure was simple. Clear out an old tower for the local lord. The girls seemed to understand what was happening and what to do, but needed some reminding of the rules. A lot. They didn't seem too inquisitive about what was in the tower. They just wanted to kill the few monsters that were there and get out. The rogue, however, went off by himself and looted everything. He would find ways to avoid the traps and monsters, then the girls would run to wherever the monsters were and kill them. They only knew the monsters' locations because of the heavy amount of metagaming. I tried to throw in descriptions of the ruined halls and destroyed rooms, but all I got from Mr. Rogue was, "Yeah, that's cool, but what's in here that looks valuable?" And I'd give him a roll for the loot he found. By the end of the game session, after a brief closed talk in another room, I was told that I got the job. I was to run 4 to 6 hour Pathfinder sessions once a week at 20 USD an hour. He would pay for pizza and drinks. He even offered his own meds from his herb side hustle, which I refused, not fully understanding what he really meant. He also wanted me to find more players for the group, seeing as his girls may have to do some long shifts from time to time and wouldn't be able to make it. He also wanted to get more business for his natural med and massage hustles. He said that I had that innocent kid look, and that it would be better if I asked around. I asked some friends to join the game and also looked for more people from local groups. The host asked me to run an urban campaign that didn't go too far from the main location. Luckily, I already had a homebrewed city that I'd been building in my spare time. It was set in the middle of a stormy tropical isle, and now I had a group to try it on. The setting was made to be very drop in, drop out, but it did have a main story which involved the group going from poor outcasts to wealthy and respected members of the city's political class. I had months of content already, and I was excited that I could finally use it for a game I was DMing. At least I must have been excited, as I managed to underestimate how much of a that guy the host was. He somehow bypassed most of the content I had planned for the group. I'm not sure if he did this on purpose or because he wasn't at the table for large chunks of time, as he would pop in after taking care of some business around the large house/apartment. Here are some notable examples of what he did to personally ruin or outright bypass everything I'd planned for the game. So, this is a very long story, and I thought I would break up my commentary into sections after the relevant part, rather than wait until the end and dump a ton of thoughts all at once. Firstly, let me say I don't really want to get into a deep discussion about the legality and morality of the things Mr. Rogue was doing as a business. I have no problem with sex workers, and I tend to take the stance that if you're an adult, you do you as long as it isn't hurting other people. After all, there are a lot of legal substances you can become addicted to, but they're still sold. What I will say is that I actually feel bad for the women here. Can you imagine having to play D&D with your boss? Better not disagree with him or your livelihood is on the line. Plus, I highly doubt that this was their idea. But we do get some foreshadowing of just how much of a jerk Mr. Rogue will become. Y'all, don't interrupt the DM's descriptions. That's just rude. The inheritance. Wasted. When the party first arrived at the tropical city, the first thing I wanted to do is give them a proper base, seeing as the starting tavern was more of a flop house than a proper inn. I knew that some of the players said their characters had noble backgrounds, and that they wanted to check in on them. The plot hook was supposed to be that the party went to the family manor to see it in ruins. An old butler who had a small shack near the front gate of the manor would tell the party how the paladin and wizard's noble families had lost their homes to less than noble means. The party could begin the quest by getting the key to the manor and finding faked documents. Then they could try and get the manor back from the evil rival noble family. What actually happened was very different. While most of the party was looking at the ruined manor, Mr. Rogue spotted the old butler coming out of his shack. The butler looked at the party and spotted the paladin's noble seal on his back. That's when Mr. Rogue told me, "I'm going to sneak up to the creepy old man and slit his neck open." Me. Wait. What? Mr. Rogue. "It's a creepy man waiting in the shadows. I know what he wants and I'm not letting him hurt anyone in the party." So he sneaks up and critted the old man. This killed him instantly and before any of the party could take note of him. Then Mr. Rogue looted the old man's shack. Inside he found the butler's journal, key, and some papers I had made into handouts that were meant for the group. I gave them to the rogue, who at the very least I thought could pass them on to the rest of the group after looking them over. He asked if there was some kind of hidden code in the documents that he wasn't seeing and asked to do some skill checks. I told him they didn't apply here. So he burned the documents in the fireplace as well as set fire to the shack. "If I don't deserve whatever code is in the docs and no one else has as high skills as me, might as well destroy whatever assassin codes and orders he had," he said to me as he threw out the handouts. Only he had seen them, by the way. He then proceeded to get the party to go back to the tavern and plan to guard a beekeeper's farm. I tried to salvage it by having a second servant of the old family be in the same tavern. She'd ID the nobles of the group and tried to share the same info I had tried to give them beforehand. The rogue, who beforehand said he was looking for anyone watching them, picks up on the old woman and decides to split from the group to talk to her. He opened up by giving her some wine from his personal stash. "Thank you kindly, is that man?" "Please, drink first, then we can talk." "What?" "I offered you a drink, and in halfling customs, it's an insult to talk without drinking first." One diplomacy check later, the old woman is shamed into drinking the wine. "Oh, this is great. Now, is that young man?" "She has to make a con save or take stat damage." Now, previously, Mr. Rogue had used his earnings to buy poison. It was designed so that it would only weaken normal monsters, but could still outright kill normal non-player characters, like a level 1 commoner, which the old woman just so happened to be. So she failed her save and outright died from constitution damage. The rogue propped up the body of the spy before rejoining the party. The wizard and paladin were glaring at the rogue, who defended himself by saying out of game, "They were clearly assassins and spies for some kind of cult. That's how I would DM it anyway." It didn't help that later that session, the rogue, by himself, snuck into the former future base of the party, looted the different rooms, and constantly interrupted my descriptions of the rooms to speed up the looting of the assassin lair. Then he set the whole place on fire. Yes, I did talk to him after that. He continued to say that he knew it was an assassin's lair, but that I gave it my best try at hiding the fact. Wow, talk about getting stuck on an idea. Really? They're spies because that's how he would DM it? Mr. Rogue does know he's not the DM, right? We're also beginning to see a recurring theme with the rogue, setting things on fire. I would like to give props to the DM though. At least he tried to incorporate the characters' backstories into the plot. That can be a great way to make any game feel more alive. On to the next section. The quickest gang war I've ever seen. The next big plot hook was a gang war between two rival gangs as the City Watch tried hard to keep the peace. The party had done a number of smaller jobs that had gotten them noticed in the city. Also, one of the new players, a dwarf fighter, desired to have his big character arc be rejoining his brother, who was the captain of the watch. The plan was to slowly dig up info on the two gangs by intrigue and combat missions, ending with a big raid on at least one of the bases. The surviving base then would have become one of the big bads of the campaign. Mr. Rogue was the unofficial leader of the party at this point, so the party usually followed his lead. And what Mr. Rogue desired to do was mail the captain a drawing of his posterior, saying that we would never work with piggies, and forge the dwarf's signature on the letter. This officially burned that player's plot hook for his own good. The party did a great job of finding the headquarters of the gangs, plotting out and following a number of the members. Mr. Rogue then got one of his girls playing a bard to use a charm to get into the base. Once inside, she used a second-level charm spell to get the leader to raid the other gang's base. Then he called the Watch, who had their top NPCs come to join in on the raid of the base. I had hoped they would use this opportunity to get the reputation needed for the next step of the campaign. But then everyone was blindsided by the rogue. He gave an order to the girls. As soon as we're deep enough, we set fire on the building and lock everyone inside, officers and master criminals alike. Everyone fled, excluding the dwarf fighter. He was trying to RP his honor-bound bond to his brother by warning him of the trap. He died with his brother, and the player quit outright. Mr. Rogue was kind of proud that he not only made the city safer from crime, but completely decapitated the leadership of the Watch. He said, "A good pig is a dead pig," which was a bit of a shock for me. Until this point, I had never encountered someone who had a deep hate of law enforcement. Wonder if the rogue is just naturally this entitled when he plays games, or if it's exceptionally bad because he's paying most of the people playing. Throwing away someone's character arc for their own good? as if that's his decision to make. No wonder that player quit. I would have too. And I'm a little concerned about the amount of times arson makes its way into this story. It makes me wonder if that isn't something Mr. Rogue thinks about a bit too often. Finally, we reach the thing that derailed the whole game, the expedition for the Deep Dwarves. It was after the party had completed one of the major quests, breaking up a demonic cult that had been operating out of a cursed item shop. They were able to loot a large amount of gold, and the rogue had taken a few levels of cleric by burning some demon summoning scrolls. So, seeing as 2 of the 3 major quests had already been killed horribly by the now holy rogue, I decided to start stage 2 early. The plan was that the party gain a reputation for being great, noble, and reliable problem solvers. After that, they would be sought out by a gnome scholar who was trying to set up an expedition to the local ruins. The expedition's goal was to look into an extinct race of dwarves that lived so far down the light of day never touched them. He'd been trying to find funding outside of his homeland because some fascist religious types took control of it by military coup. The idea was simple. The party would go to each of the guilds and trade unions to ask for assistance. The guilds and unions would then outfit the expedition with men, gear, and supplies to make it to the dig site and begin the dungeon diving. This was supposed to be a different activity for the group when they wouldn't be running the holdings that would come from the money and fame generated from completing the dig. First, they would have to complete a quest for the tropical traders, who were having a problem with dire fruit bats. They had moved onto the 3 growing islands, and druids were protesting the farmers trying to make a living off the fruit and crops there. Helping them would supply the expedition with food. Next would be obtaining the surveying and digging tools. The craftsmen would agree to make them if the party found out why one of their trade settlements was being weirdly quiet. The guild had sent inspectors to the settlement, but they hadn't returned. The trick was that a Lovecraftian cult had moved in, killed off or converted the leadership to serve the Elder Ones, that started making a pair of lenses that could be used to bring dark beings into the world. And third but finally, they needed workers from the labor union. The union wanted the party to clear a rock quarry that had raptors move into it to make a nest. In reality, the raptors were just attracted by the lizard folk and Naga who had taken over the place. They didn't take kindly to the quarry company coming in and destroying their temple for building materials, and killed everyone in their sleep. Now they were trying to place a dark curse on the city. The runners who were sent up there to see what the delay was only saw the raptors and mutilated bodies and called that in. I figured this would be a great chance for some morally gray RP. Also, to get the party as a whole more XP, since they were flying through most of the planned content and story. This could have gotten the party the magical upgrades I was trying to give them as well. They hadn't found them as the party had barely explored their surroundings. The exception to this being the rogue and a few of the veteran players, who would lose out on the ability checks to the min-maxed rogue, who would then keep the items for himself. Or they would lose the vote on who gets the loot, as Mr. Rogue's girls would outnumber the client players every time. He would then sell off the magic items seeing as he couldn't use them. Or even more insultingly, rent them out to the other players. Players who saw it as the exploitative bull that it was. But none of that planned story actually happened. Instead, guess what the divine rogue did? Hell no, deal with your own effing BS, you commie parasites! The rogue didn't want to do any favors for any of the guilds or unions, nor did he want to pay them for the use of any of their men, equipment, or goods. This was despite the fact that they controlled nearly 90% of each of their respective markets. So he put it to a vote. Since he seemed like a leader to the new players, he won 5-3. The first no came from the paladin, who was just there to watch the train wreck. The other 2 were from the new guys. Their introductions had been tied to the guild and union quest respectively, and were left blindsided and without a proper introduction after this derailment. They left after that session as they saw this wasn't going to be the roleplay heavy game they thought it was going to be. Mr. Rogue got the cheapest gear, gathered the poor, crippled, and elderly, and demanded that the people coming in on the trip do the grocery shopping as a buy-in. By the luck of the die, the food that they brought turned out to mostly be spoiled meats and donated food from an evil gnome cult that was following them. He then did the medieval equivalent of wire fraud in the name of the professor, who he had tricked into being his legal patsy for anything else he thought they needed. On the day of the departure, he and his girls broke into each of the guilds and unions to steal their ledgers and then set fire to the record rooms, with the leaders inside for good measure. So they were off on the expedition 3 to 4 months ahead of schedule, and now I was left with having to figure out what state to put the city in when they return. If they return. Most of the hands-on leadership was dead, the economy had been halted, and the underground had a massive power vacuum to fill. The city folk were at risk of starving as food would have to be imported from the mainland months away. The worst of it was that 2 cults of pure evil were about to attack. At this point, as well paid as I was for this, it was getting on my nerves. I was having to plan more on the fly, it was affecting my hunt for a better job, and it was affecting my sleep and schoolwork to the point that I was having frequent arguments with my folks. Everything came to a head in the next few sessions. It had been about a week in game since they took off for the dig site, and they were almost there when I decided to mix up the encounters. I had a small bandit fort set up in the middle of the road they were using. They would need to pay them, talk their way through, fight the fort, or take the long way around. They chose to fight the small fort of 500 or so untrained thieves. 30 were in the fort at the time, and the rest were slowly trying to sneak behind the caravan. With the 2 leaders, the expedition had at least 100 caravan guards with basic training, and at least 5 to 7 party members of about 3rd or 4th level. The party had expressed interest in some of the newer books of Pathfinder, so I decided to test out the mass combat rules and thought that everyone would enjoy leading the guards into battle. That's not what happened. Turns out being interested does not mean reading the rules, even if you print them out for them. Mr. Rogue decided the best plan was to trick the workers into fleeing into the ambush along with some of the guards to sell the bluff. He told the paladin character that he had his back to take the fort and plan a counter-defense. He said he had the spell power, creativity, and gold to make taking the fort easy. This was a lie. Instead, he was hoping that it would be a good enough diversion. He and his girls fled for their lives as, "You said that fleeing may be an option at any time." I did say that, but for more obvious reasons like rolling stone traps or the sewer monster they never cleared because of the rogue's neat freak character trait. So the easy mass combat encounter became a bloodbath as the noob and paladin blindly charged the fort with no support. Most of the guards were disorganized to say the least and couldn't offer significant help. The paladin and noob were shot down by tower archers as the lack of real leadership made the guards' squad roles useless. Because of this, they were easily overwhelmed despite the better training and gear. The rest of the party made it to the dig site alone, and after auto-rolling for the rest of the battle, more than 70% of the caravan was wiped out. Only a handful of carts were left after the carnage, and nearly all the key NPCs had been killed. As the decimated caravan rolled in, Mr. Rogue asked me, "So, how much gold did I save getting all the guards and trail guides killed?" I don't know if I ever found out if this was his plan the whole time, or if I didn't explain the encounter right. I do know that I wanted to hurt this guy in-game for all the stress of his nuclear-powered shenanigans. So, for the next few sessions, it was just the rogue and the girls. At this point, I was running out of gaming groups to pull players from. I had them digging up the entrance hall to the dungeon as one of the massive skips in content had left me no time to design said dungeon. That and I wanted to unleash the gate guards on them. The gate guards were 2 massive black marble statues made by the deep dwarves' blood rites to drive back anyone who dared to try unlock the door to the elevators. The gate guards acted as high-level necromancers that would cause the excavators to go mad and then kill each other or themselves by sabotaging the digging in some way. As the dead mounted, the necromantic magic would kick in and turn the dead bodies of the people and animals in the area into undead monsters and horrors to defend the gate. I may have played my hand too early, because when they were clearing a room, I rolled on the random encounter pool and got a couple of trapdoor spiders. The spiders grabbed the rogue and pulled him into their hole. They started to wail on the halfling rogue and nearly killed him. His girls were able to break into the hole and kill the spiders before they could finish off the rogue, though. So I might have fudged the undead creation rules a bit. I asked how they're lined up as they're leaving the cave. The rogue was positioned in the back. Perfect. With newfound undead vigor, the spiders jumped the rogue and rolled a nat 1 on both their surprise attacks. Mr. Rogue, who I had forgotten was also a cleric, used Turn Undead and forced the spiders as far back into their hole as possible. Then the 5 of them set the webs on fire. This attack clued him in that something was off, so he did a scan for magic and found the statues 20 feet below ground. I have to say that at this point, it got interesting again, if not fun. Now it was full on me versus him instead of me running for the party. I know that sounds bad, but I was under a crazy amount of stress at the time. Frankly, I was mentally and emotionally done at this point. $20 an hour be damned. I tried to have the statues whisper dreams of unionization and coffee breaks to the poorly treated workers. He and the girls scouted out one of the unions, took the leaders out of range of the statues for a hunting party to talk about better pay, and then murdered them in their sleep, then burned the bodies. So I tried to start heated racial tensions in the cave with charm spells. Mr. Rogue made an example of a few of them by burning them alive, saying he won't tolerate bigots. When that didn't work, I had a few cave-ins and accidents, as I saw it as the best way to make bodies. He and his girls ran the risk of saving them, and if he couldn't, he found a way to get to the cave, fill it with oil, set it on fire, and reseal it to be a makeshift cremation oven, complete with smoke coming out of holes on the surface. I even had a rebellion due to all the nightmarish acts of cruelty. The workers demanded better treatment or they would all walk. Mr. Rogue and his girls hit everyone with a sleep spell. Seeing as there were about 50 or less of them and they were all low-level common folk, excluding the professor who was fearful for his life as he'd already been tortured a few times, everyone passed out. He and his magical girls reformed the walls and defenses they had set up earlier to keep people in as well as keep critters out. Then they murdered more by fire to make it clear who was in charge. Finally, the day came when they broke the seal on the door after a week of death and torment. Mr. Rogue was proud of himself and was making a speech to the workers. The workers had no spirit left or even will to live. Some figured that they'd be killed after the dig or made into food, seeing as no one was sure where the fresh food was coming from. All hunting and fishing had stopped long ago, and at this point most figured cannibalism was at play. It was some druid spell I forgot the name of, but the rogue didn't tell the workers that. They were just waiting for the end with their fellow workers, which had been whittled down to 20 or so. If you're wondering, there were about 500 to 700 of them to start. This is when I chose to strike with the dead that Mr. Rogue had missed. You see, in the digs, they were using birds to see if there was enough air in the shafts. Tropical vermin had moved in looking for food and shelter. Even bigger hunters like ferrets had been brought in to control the vermin problem. The only thing they checked for was the horses and other pack mules that had died so that they could be burned with the other bodies. But you should have seen their surprise when packs of shadow rats, swarms of undead birds, and dog-sized ferrets with their bodies fused together flooded the area. I'd even given some of them resistance to divine magic to make it harder for the rogue to just use his holy pimp slap on them. It was a long and heavy battle as they were attacked from air and ground both under and above. The birds didn't stand a chance as the mass casting of Turn Undead made them flee wildly. But it was still enough of a distraction to have the meat ferrets sneak attack from underground. The shadow rats rushed around the tanky frontliners to reach the squishies in the rogue squad of casters. I don't remember much of that battle, just that I nearly got 2 of the 4 girls downed and the rogue had to spend the last of his healing bursts to get everyone on their feet again. The main boss was a flesh golem. When the fighting started, some of the workers hid in the utility tunnels, which then collapsed during the fighting, killing all of them. This gave the black statues the bodies needed to make one. I figured this was it, a TPK. There wasn't anything I thought they could do as the big mass of hateful flesh dug its way out. That is, until the rogue called on the Earthbender. Now, originally, I wanted to have it be the main handbook. As the game went on and on, one of the girls seemed more interested in the game than others. She would talk to me after games about the rules and the more complex classes. She even kept in contact with me on Facebook to talk about other nerd or anime topics. One of the classes she really wanted a multi-class into was the Elementalist. I decided to allow it, seeing as out of all the other players, she seemed to have a spine and was willing to give herself real agency, even if it was just to be better at support casting. So she used her earthbending to collapse the entry on top of the flesh monster's face. Then she kept the monster in place so that the rest of the party could gang up on the monster's head and beat it into a bloody pulp. I failed save after save to get out of the mud and dirt it was trapped in. The rogue and earthbending bard high-fived as they entered the dungeon that I had barely designed, and at this point I knew I would just be stumped by the rogue's BS. But I had to try. I had an idea for what he would face when the cult caught up with them, and with witnesses from the remaining workers still locked up at the camp, that would give the cult all the blackmail needed to turn the city against them. As part of the cultists' turn to bring the survivors back to the city, the rest stayed to wait for the party to come back. A week passed and I came in with all my gaming gear to see that another DM had taken my place. Mr. Rogue said he felt like I was burning out and decided to have an old friend come in to replace me. He at least gave me money for the last game and the game I was going to run. I played for the first session. The new DM seemed to have taken my dungeon idea and expanded it, and seemed to be able to counter the rogue's BS better than I ever could. I left the group and never went back. The epilogue. Months later, I ran into the new DM while I was trying to join a game. I hadn't had much luck as it seemed like I had some kind of reputation hanging over my head, keeping me from joining. So it was refreshing to be about to join a game again. I asked how the old game went and if he made any money from it. He seemed confused as I told him that I was being paid to run games for Mr. Rogue, as well as the shenanigans he pulled on me. New DM said as long as he had known him, the Rogue had been a huge that guy and a min-maxer. He would have him take breaks as he found ways to skip major encounters and dungeons. I asked, "How did you solve that problem?" "Oh, he got too busy with his drug and pimping side gigs." "Wait, what?" "I thought he told you. I mean, it's pretty obvious." Turns out he was trying to get a D&D-based prostitution thing going on where nerdy clients would play with his hottest girls and maybe return for some one-on-one sessions. He soon found out that his normal clients weren't that nerdy and drugs don't move. He also got more addicted to World of Warcraft, and it barely gave the rogue time to plan. That was where I came in. He thought I was the most innocent person he had ever met, and that he could use me to bring in more nerdy types to get them into the whole RPG, sex, drug thing he had planned. Unbeknownst to me, the players that I attracted to the table, he turned to offer them some private sessions with the girls for how poorly the game went. They would decline and stop coming over, giving me weird looks and excuses as to why they no longer wanted to be in the game anymore. Turns out my friends and colleagues assumed I was this guy's partner in crime at best, or at least one of his underlings, and slowly ghosted me. So that's how I updated my expectations and was a black sheep from my local gaming groups for a number of years. TLDR got hired by a massive that guy who was a real pimp and drug dealer who was trying to expand his client base to the local nerd community. Got kicked after trying to TPK the party with undead critters. Edit. For the people wondering how this over-the-top story is real, as any sane man could have seen this coming, I'm autistic and miss social signals that normal people would pick up on. It didn't help that my mother, who works with law enforcement and courts, sheltered me to the point that my idea of a pimp was just stereotypes. Wait, Was it Mr. Rogue's plan to ruin the game all along? If his goal was to offer consolation nights with the women, presumably so that they would want to pay for more later, did he mess up the sessions on purpose? If so, that is the stupidest business idea I've ever heard of. He should have made the sessions really fun so they kept coming back. I've read way too many stories of someone crushing on the girl of the gaming group, so all he had to do was wait. Maybe it was his plan to make them fun, but he was just too self-absorbed to pull it off? I don't know. On another note, D&D can be a power fantasy for some people. I understand that. I know that a lot of people don't care for min-max characters, but I personally don't mind them. What I do have a problem with is when that character then just takes over everyone else's roles and essentially doesn't let the other people play. The worst example definitely being when he sold all the magic items that were meant for other people just because he couldn't use them. When talking about the DM, despite the glaring issue of going after the party head-on in an attempt to win the game, I can't fault him too much. Some people are just able to roll with crazy plot derailments better than others. I think he did an alright job given the circumstances. In a strange way, it seems like that last session was the one everyone had the most fun with. Players high-fiving is usually a good thing. In the end, I think being replaced was for the better in that situation. It was clearly affecting OP outside of the game. I don't know how many times I will end up saying this, but if the game isn't fun, don't play. Talk about your issues with the group. If they don't listen, find another group. Even if you end up in a D&D dry spell, no D&D is better than bad D&D. Well, that's it for this week, fiends. We've looked at a lot of horror stories on this channel, and I think it's time for a little break. Next, I plan on featuring some lighthearted and fun stories, so I hope you all tune in for that. Thanks again so much to artmanxp for the story. I hope you're having a much better time in any of your current games. I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye!